Hello everyone, it's Ronnie Henson here from Southwest Oklahoma. Today got my parts in for the carburetor rebuilt, the Holley 4160. We're going to put it together. I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. If you could, please hit the like and subscribe button if you like this video. But anyhow, let's go ahead and get started getting this thing put together. First thing I like to do is take the main body right here and get this thing going before we mount it to the base plate. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. One thing that we got to put in there, remember the little needle valve right there. We got to drop that in. Take a pair of needle nose pliers. It goes right down there where the squirter is going to go. We're going to drop that in right there. We're going to take the squirter, and if you'll remember, the squirter has a gasket on the bottom. It has a beveled screw, and it's got a beveled gasket on the top. Make sure that all three of those are in there together. And then this thing has a little notch right there, and that notch has got to line up inside the carburetor down here. So what I like to do is take a pair of needle nose pliers, hold that, tilt this up, and then of course nothing goes as planned. So let's try this again. And take a Phillips screwdriver. Make sure that that's good and tight. Make sure that that's good and tight. You can see in there. So we've got the squirter in. You know that that's good to go. We're going to take the back of the carburetor right here, and we're going to take the rear gasket. Place the rear gasket on here. We have the back plate and the back plate gasket. Those two line up, all the holes line up. And you're going to line, this thing has tabs right here. You can't hardly mess it up. Line those tabs up with the holes right there. And it's kind of a snug fit. And that's what it'll look like right there when you get the backing plate on there. You've got the gasket in between there. So we're going to go ahead and get that on there. And then we're going to look for our hex screws right here. You got 6 of those. So let's go ahead and get the hex screws in location. Take your hex screwdriver. Don't tighten them up, just snug them until you get them all in, and then we want this uniformly snugged up. So we're going to go around just barely snug, and then once we get everything in and it's seated into this position, then we'll go ahead and sequentially tighten them. And then once I get them kind of somewhat snug, I like to do a cross pattern. I go from top to bottom, bottom to top, and then from side to side. And then once you've done that, you pretty much got a good solid seal on the gasket. And then just go around them. It doesn't matter in what order after that, and just double check them one more time, because these gaskets will compress, and you will have to go back here and hit them 2 or 3 times before you get the final seal. Okay, that feels pretty good. That's what that's going to look like right there. So we've got that done. We've got the squirter in with the gaskets and the needle valve. It goes in there. Now we want to line these gaskets are very important. They have a variation of holes in them, and not every base gasket will work on any one. It has to be specific for a 4160 in order for the fuel to flow. This is a specific gasket right here. So we're going to lay this on here, and I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to make sure that that corresponds to all the openings in the main body, which it does. Once I'm satisfied that I've got the right gasket and it's going to line up with all the corresponding holes, then we're going to go ahead and place it on the base plate. Once we place it on the base plate, we're going to put our 6 screws in there. These screws right here, the base plate screws. But before we do that, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to put just a little bit of silicone in each one of the holes, and what that does is that keeps it from galling, and it just helps when you take it apart and rebuild it again. So I'm going to get that in there, this in there, this. And again, on this one right here, don't try to tighten them all down as soon as they go in, because that's not what you want to do. And another thing to remember is that when you're doing this and you're using a Phillips screwdriver, make sure that you use the Phillips screwdriver that matches the Phillips size screw that you're actually putting in there, because if you use one that's too small, you'll have a tendency to strip out the head on the Phillips screw that's holding it in here. So I start off with a little smaller one, but when I do the final torque, I like to use a little bit bigger one that fits this perfectly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go crisscross, and I'm going to snug it. Top to bottom, left to right, side to side. And then once I get them all fairly snug, it don't matter, then you go back and you can do your final torquing. Put a lot of pressure on that, because you do not want this thing to suck air in between the base plate and the main body. That's what causes the carburetor to have a vacuum leak. Once you have that done, you're satisfied with the bases on there good, then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put together the back bowl, and that's this one over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the float, and there's a little notch in there for that right there to fit. You're going to slide that in there where it fits up into the notch, and then you're going to press the little lever up there, and then you're going to, these little screws are hard to hold, but you're going to get those started. My big old fat fingers, it's hard to get in there. Get you a flat tip screwdriver, and let's get that snugged up. And we're working on the back bowl. And you want to make sure that that's good and tight. The next thing we're going to put in is the needle valve. Earlier on the disassemble, I called that a jet. I'm sorry, that's a needle valve. That's not a jet. This is what a jet looks like. This is a needle valve. This needle valve has an O-ring on it. You want to make sure that that has a new O-ring on it, because if you don't and gas gets around that, you'll never be able to tune your carburetor. It has to have a new O-ring on it when you put it in there. They're very inexpensive, and they come with a kit. Put a little bit of WD-40 on that so that when you stick it down inside there, it doesn't gall. And in order to screw that down, you have to get that bolt, that nut, take it down, and I've built so many of these. What I look for the start is that I'm going to take that down. So that I have about 3 threads showing on that right there. Or you can raise that up, and that thing right there is just in line with the top of those screws right there. If you'll look inside there, I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's screws in there, and that's just right at the bottom of those 2 screws. That's a base starting point right there. So now what we want to do is we want to take our 2 gaskets, and these are little bitty paper gaskets. Set one on top, put your adjusting bolt on there, put your second one on top of that. You take this funky looking little screw right here and you stick it in there and you screw it down, holding everything in place. Take a big flat tip and just snug it for right now. It don't have to be too tight. Double check, make sure that that's free floating. It is. So we're good to go on that. We want to put our sight screw. This little screw right here is what allows you to take it out to set the level of fuel in the float bowl. And we want to go ahead and screw that in. Screw that in the side. Just snug it for right now. We'll go back through and tighten everything up here in just a second. Okay, so that pretty much does the back bowl. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set the back bowl up on here. We're going to get the bowl screws. And if you'll look at the bowl screws from the back to the front, you can see the difference in them. You see how much difference there are? We're going to use the short ones. The short ones go in the back because you have a backing plate back there. And we're going to take that right there. We're just going to get them started. And you want to make sure that you don't tighten it too much until you get them all in. Make sure that you have your Teflon gaskets on all 4 of them because that keeps it from leaking. We're going to put that on there. Once you get them pretty snug just by hand, then you go ahead and get your ratchet and give them a little snug, crisscrossing them, bottom to top, left to right, right to left, alternate, and then you just want to get that feel, and you'll know when you bring it around there. Well, we're back here. Let's go ahead and put the vacuum cup on here. Stick that on there so we don't forget that. Let's turn this little puppy around. Now, one thing that I do want to do also is let's go ahead and put the filter in the back bowl. Okay, and you've got a gasket, you've got a little spring, and you've got the filter. A lot of people don't use these. I like to have them. If you got them, use them. And then you have the fuel fitting with the metal gasket. Let's put that on there. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop the paper gasket in there. Now this one here, I'd already stuck it in there. Next thing you want to do is stick the spring in. Spring goes in, and then you want to put this in. And the way that we're going to put this right here is we're going to put the flat part. If you'll look, it's got a cone. That's where the fuel comes into, and that's where it goes into the carburetor. We're going to put the flat part down. Then we're going to center that inside there so it's not in a bind. Start the threads. And then we're going to make sure that that metal gasket is properly centered before we snug it up. And it's going to be just like that right there. We're going to take a 1-inch and we're just going to snug it for right now. So we got that snug. Okay, we're going to turn this back around, facing the front. And now what we're going to do is we're going to assemble the front bowl. And it's pretty much just like the back one. You've got that part right there that goes into the little groove, you just stick that inside the little groove right like that. That's what it looks like. We're going to take the 2 little screws with my fat fingers and get them started. Take a flat tip screwdriver. Okay, we got that in there. You remember the little umbrella deal that I told you about? This is what a new one looks like right here. This is a new one on there, so I'm not going to waste it. But you see that long tip right there? That right there is what you push up through the hole. You pull it up through there, and then you take a set of side cutters and you just snip it off so that it doesn't interfere with the float when the float comes down on it. But this is a new one, so we're not going to use the new one right there. We're going to keep that over there. We're going to take the needle valve. We're going to shoot a little bit of silicone. Well, what I was going to show you on this one right here is how to put these O-rings on here. I told you about the O-ring. The other one had the new one on there. That's the new one right there. What I like to do is I like to just get this thing right here, put just a little bit of silicone on there, get a little bit on the O-ring, slide that O-ring over the needle valve. You may have to use a little flat tip screwdriver and get it over the hump right there until it gets in that groove. Once it's in that groove and it turns freely, you're ready to go. Now you got silicone on it, so it's not going to get burgered up when we insert it in here. We're going to put it in here. We're going to take our little bolt. We're going to run that down till we have 3 threads showing. Okay, you see that right there? We got about 3 threads showing. That right there is just about horizontal. And that's a base setting. We're going to come back and adjust it once we install it. Now this one here has both gaskets that stayed on that. That's why I'm not putting new gaskets on there. If that leaks, I'll change it. But right now we're going to leave that on there. We're going to take this screw and we're going to insert that. And again, we're just going to snug it. And we're going to go ahead and do our gasket. This one didn't have a gasket in there. I put one in there before we started. I'm going to drop that down in there. I'm going to take my little flat tip. I'm going to make sure that it's centered down in there. And it's perfectly centered. And we're going to drop the spring, just like we did on the rear one, down in there, and it's self-centering. We're going to put that with the cone facing out. We're going to take the fitting with the washer. We're going to stick it over it, let it self-center, and then we're going to thread it in there. Once we get it threaded in there, we're going to snug it up with a 1-inch wrench, just snug, and then we're going to put our sight screw back in there. Take that sight screw, put it in there. Make sure you don't forget that little metal washer that's on there. You're going to have that. Okay? So we got that right there. All that's looking good. Now we're going to do the diaphragm pump. And on the diaphragm pump, you've got the spring. The spring just sits down in there like so. You have the actual diaphragm, accelerator diaphragm, like that. That part right there faces up. You're going to stick that on there like so, over the spring where it faces up. And then you're going to take the housing, the diaphragm housing, and you're going to lay it on top of that. And then you're going to get your 4 little screws. Just stick them in there, get them started. This is a Phillips, so you're going to get your little Phillips. Get 1 or 2 started where it centers that for you. You want to crisscross these. Don't ever tighten everything up at one time. Just work your way around. Doesn't really matter what order you do it in. Just alternate until you start getting them snug and you feel them tightening up. And then once you get them tightened up, put that last little ump on them. And you'll know you got this in there because you'll feel a little bit of a plunge right there when that's in there correctly. So I've got a little bit of a plunge. That's all good to go. We're going to set that off to the side right there, and we're going to put our metering block together. I did get the new gaskets. Remember I told you about the cork gaskets that go on the metering screws? You want to make sure you change them because the old ones are hard and brittle and it allows air through there. These are real nice and tight. I've already put one in, and we're going to put this one in. You just drop it down in there. You take a flat tip screwdriver and you just kind of work it down into the hole right there until it presses in there. It'll be a real nice press, and it'll look like that right there. Once you get that in there, you take this and you start feeding it in straight by your hand. This is the needle, idle adjustment screw, and then you're going to need a flat tip screwdriver. So you're going to take a flat tip screwdriver and you're going to take it and screw it all the way in until it bottoms out, ever so lightly. Don't do it hard. We're going to screw that down until it touches, and it just touched. So once it touches, we're going to do 3 turns, 3 half a turns out. That's 1 half, 2 half, 3 halves. That's the base setting. Let's put the other one in. Cork gasket's already in there. Let's get this started. Take it all the way in until it touches. Don't do it hard, very lightly, until you feel pressure down there where it makes contact with the, okay, it made contact right there. We're going to come out 3 half a turns. That's 1, 2, 3. That's a base setting right there. Let's put our little cap on there. That's for the distributor. We're going to cap that off. Okay, that's a little snug. Anytime they're a little snug, don't force them. Put yourself a little silicone or some WD-40 on there, and that baby will slide right up on there with no problem. Now let's take our power valve. This power valve is a 4.5. They come at 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, 7. They come at whatever. Once you build an engine and you put a vacuum gauge on it and you decide what idle vacuum you have, then you cut that in half and then you round up, and that's how you determine what power valve you're going to put in here. Mine's right around 12. I could actually get away with a 6.5 power valve, but I like it to come in a little quicker because I usually build a performance engine, so I usually run a 4.5. That's what I like. So we're gonna put this in here, and this right here is gonna go on this side. And when you put this in here, you want to make sure that that gasket stays centered, and you kind of have to jiggle it around and eyeball it so that it's centered. And I know it's on there really good because it's not offset. So I'm going to take my 1-inch wrench and I'm going to put quite a bit of pressure on that to where it seats up really good, and that's good to go. I want my jets now. These are number 72. The jet size is based on what engine you're running, how heavy the car is, what gears you have, what transmission you have, and there's a whole lot of variables. What I like to do is go to Holley's website, I find out what the calibration is for this carburetor, and I build it back to specs. This one calls for a 72. This particular jet right here, set of jets are 72s. So we're going to stick these in here. And yeah, they make a fancy little tool for about $19 or $20 to take these out, but I'm telling you right now, save your money and use it on something else. A flat tip, big flat tip works perfect. And we're going to screw these in nice and tight. That's good to go. Everything's done. That looks really good. Let's get the rear gasket. Now what I like to do on this gasket is a lot of times I'll spray a little bit of WD-40 on it and wipe it around real good. And what that does is it helps it seal, and it also allows, when you get ready to take it apart, the gasket won't stick. Even though these are supposedly non-stick gaskets. Now this will only let you put it on one way. I tried to put it on backwards, and not just to show you, but I was putting it on backwards and it wouldn't go on. And I'm going to tell you why it wouldn't go on. Because this thing has two studs right here, and this gasket is built a certain way. And that stud right there keeps that only going on one way. If you try to put it on the other way, it won't line up, so it won't allow you to put that on backwards, which is a good thing because I've been known to put shit on backwards. Okay, once we got that on there, we're going to stick that right here, and then we're going to take the front bowl, and we're going to take this gasket right here. I'm going to put a little WD-40 on it, and it don't take much. You just get some on your hand and just run it on both sides right there where it just makes contact with it. And then this right here is going to go. This is one thing that we got to put on there is this little bitty. This is like a slosh baffle or something that keeps the gasoline in the bowl from sloshing up through there. But you want to put this on. You want to put that on like so. And then you want to put your gasket on top of it. And then press it down on the studs with your thumb. Be careful not to tear the gasket. You don't want to tear the gasket. And then once you get it pressed down on there like it should be, then you're ready to put it up on here, and you're ready to put your rear bowl on. We're going to put the rear bowl on. We're going to get our long bolts. We're going to make sure that we have our Teflon gasket on them. We're going to get them in there and get them started by hand. Okay, one thing that I need to mention that I didn't do, and I do this every time I put one of these together, I always forget about this part right here. This diaphragm or the accelerator pump lever arm has to be underneath this right here. And if you don't, you put it together, then you got to take this all back apart to put that under there. So make sure that that's under there right there before you put all these bowl screws in there. I've done this a gazillion times, and every time I do it, I always forget about that. But it ain't no big deal. If you put it on, you just take it loose and put it back on. So you get these by hand until they're somewhat snug. And then you crisscross them left to right, right to left, top to bottom, so on, so on. And we're going to get this thing. Then we're going to come back before we actually put it on the carburetor, and we're going to double check everything and make everything sure that everything is good and tight. So we get this on. I like that. Everything's feeling really good. So we got that done. All that stuff's over there. We have a right here is for your distributor. This is the vacuum for the distributor, and we want to cap that off. There's three lines that go into this carburetor right here. This is a non-ported vacuum. This is a ported vacuum, and this is a non-ported vacuum for your brakes. So there's three of them that you got to cover up. So make sure that you get all three of those covered up, or you have them hooked up. So now we got that done. Now we're ready to go ahead and start putting the choke assembly on. This little puppy right here is under pressure. It's spring loaded. And what you have to do when you put it on, this is what closes the choke horn right here. This is where this goes. This is what makes this come up and down. And what you have to do is you have to bring this around by your hand, and then you have to hold it with your back finger in place. You have to put this through the hole. And yes, this is like a monkey messing with a football, I promise you. And then once you get that, and then we'll come back through here with our needle nose pliers. And remember that piece I told you don't lose? That little quarter key. Show it to you. That little quarter key right there, we're getting ready to put that in. And it's going to go right here. And we got that in. And we got that on. And now we're going to put the choke bracket in place. And we're going to line this up. And that little lever has got to be underneath there. These holes have got to be lined up. And we want to get one screw in there just to kind of hold everything into place. So I like to get this top one right here. And then we'll do this one. And remember, that's got a little bit of pressure on it, so you're going to feel a little pressure right there with that spring, because that thing's spring loaded. And then you get that in there, get that one started, and then you can get this one right here started. And this is a Phillips, so we're going to take a Phillips, and we're going to snug this. And before we get it too tight, I want to make sure that this is working properly. This thing right here should lock open. It should close, lock open, it should close, and that thing's working perfectly. That little spring tension in there is working perfectly. So we got that right. There's one thing on here that you need to see, and that's right here. There's a gasket that goes in there because there's a vacuum right there. There's a little solid gasket, cork gasket, that goes in there, and I pre-glue that to it before I put this on there, and then that presses against it, and that keeps that from leaking vacuum. And then this hole right here is for the secondary vacuum. You don't want to block that one. There's a cork gasket that has a hole in it, and I'm going to show it to you before we put the secondary vacuum on. And that's this right here, and you'll see this right here. So you look at that right there, that little cork gasket, and you can put a dab of super glue or any kind of glue, just something to hold that on there in place so that it's there and that hole is open, because you want vacuum going in there to operate that diaphragm to put this plunger up and down. So make sure that you have that on there. Now if you'll remember when I took this thing apart, I had an ugly situation where the screw broke off. Well, I did get that tapped out. I did